All right.
There you go. So we will let people in.
Excellent.
Hi, everybody. We're just waiting for people to join us. We'll get started here in just a second. It's fun to see the little counter comes up of people popping in.
Yeah, very cool.
We had 200 and something register, so we'll see how many people are just going to see the video when we send it out, and how many will take time out of their workday.
Exactly. Some will probably do the recording because this is pre-approved for recertification credit for their SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management recertification credits.
Yes.
Yeah. HRCI hasn't let me know if it's approved for them yet, but we will know soon.
We will know soon. So, all right, as people are popping in, let's get started because we know everybody's time is valuable. I am Suzanne Lucas, and you probably, if you know me as the evil HR lady, but I am here with Victoria Purser, my partner at HR Learns, and Robyn Garrett. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Garrett, Robyn Garrett. Perfect. And we're just going to have each one of us introduce ourselves a little bit, give us a little bio so you know what you're up about, and a little background on why we're together. And why we're together is I wrote an article about hush travel, and Robyn did a TikTok about it, and she didn't like it. And so I was like, awesome, because I like to talk. And so we invited her on here. But I am Suzanne Lucas, the evil HR lady. I do all things HR, and I write about it and talk about it. And that's me. And Victoria, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, I'll be short and quick. Victoria Purser. I am the principal consultant for Synergy HRM and also the president of Conquer HR. You can look those up and find me there, or find me on Facebook. I hang out at those places.
Awesome. And Robyn, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Robyn L. Garrett, and you might know me from Instagram or from TikTok if you're coming from one of those two places. So I've been in leadership for over 15 years, especially in startups. So kind of coming more from the corporate side, and definitely working with small and medium-sized businesses. Taken multiple startups from the small to the large phase, and so I have a lot of experience from that. And then I am the author of Happy at Work and also Be True to Yourself, the Personal Values Workbook.
Well, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Tell us quickly, how can I be happy at work?
You can feel safe, you can feel respected, and you can feel valued. Those three things will get you to a good, solid chance to be happy at work.
Awesome. Thank you. Now all my problems are solved. No, those are really good things. For those of you in the audience, the chat is open, and if you want to make comments there, say hello, everyone. Drop in where you're coming from. We'll be monitoring the chat, so if you have a question or a comment that you want to make, feel free to throw it in there, and hopefully we'll be able to get it going. And otherwise, I think we're going to get started and talking about hush travel. Oh, look, we have people from everywhere. Yay! So
let's throw up our poll questions so we can go ahead and get those out.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So can you put that up? We have done a couple of polls. So if you want to take and answer the questions, one, have you ever engaged in hush travel? And two, when someone travels outside the country, do you really think that they are working? And that's traveling for a vacation, not on an official work trip. And then, has hush travel ever been an issue in your company? So I realize that these are broad questions that really yes, no doesn't fit them, but you're just going to have to deal. It's our poll.
That's how polls work. This is good. I've seen some good answers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, look. Okay, so we've had everybody answer that is here. So look at that. So 17% have engaged in hush travel themselves. Dun, dun, dun. And 77% think that people when are traveling outside the country, they really think that they are working. I am firmly in the no category on that, by the way. Because I think if you're spending the money to travel, you're just not sitting in your hotel room working, but that's another topic. And then has hush travel ever been an issue in your company? And that is that's our closest one yet with 42 to 58%. So mostly saying no, but a good chunk of people that have had it be an issue before. So that's kind of interesting. You guys have any thoughts on that?
I'd be curious to know. Yeah, I'd be really curious to know what types of issues, because certainly, I've had situations where you have to plan differently, right? And a lot of us work in dispersed workforces anyway, so maybe it's not necessarily a huge adaptation, but it can be something to be conscious of. But I know some of the concerns that you voiced are for more severe and significant issues. And I know people do have questions about that. So I'm curious.
Well, I like this comment from Sharon. I didn't know it was issue. I worked for 2 weeks while visiting family in the Netherlands for the month, but my companies always know I'm there. I'm definitely working for 80 hours out of 160. I'm gone, but I'm also staying with my in-laws who don't speak English. That reminds me of a very, very bad encounter with my then boyfriend's parents who didn't speak any English, and he dropped me off at his parents' house and said, "I'll be back in 5 hours." And I was like, "Hi." It was terrible. Anyway, didn't work out for many reasons, but that was one of them. So yeah, okay. Well, maybe you guys that have had issues can throw them into the chat. And if you didn't see, I'm going to share the results and then end it, I think. For those of you that didn't read my article or didn't see Robyn's TikTok, my article was talking about hush travel, which is not the same thing as just travel. It is travel without telling your boss. So your boss assumes that you're working at home and you are in Peru or Louisiana or Iowa or whatever. Wherever you are, you're not where your boss expects you to be. And I went over the very real legal problems with that, which is if you're not authorized to work, especially out of the country, you're not authorized to work. And then even out of the state, unless your company is registered in the state in which you're working, it's kind of iffy. Now, does anybody care? In a lot of cases, no. I mean, Iowa, to the best of my knowledge, is not hunting people down that go to spend a week at grandma's. But you never know what the Iowa state legislature will do next. But I am very, very concerned about those things. And I think, Robyn, you see it from another side.
Yes. Well, I think one thing, and I see it in the comments here too, is there's different types of situations, right? A lot of people in the comments of some of the content that I put out last week mentioned different types of things like, oh, I like to go visit my parents for 2 weeks out of the year just to spend some time with them. Or I need to go care for someone that, is going to take me to a different place. So not necessarily leisure travel, like you imagine you're out there jet setting, although certainly there were people who talked about situations like that. And I do think there's a distinction between someone who's maybe doing this continuously or they're doing it for long periods of time. It's a question that I got. I saw people comment different periods of time that they thought would be okay. So, some people said 2 weeks. Some people said quite a large number of days. Like if you're in your home for this many days out of the year, as opposed to that many days out of the year, that there's a tipping point. And I thought that that was quite interesting because obviously there's a lot of different reasons where you might not be at your home, and there's small amounts of time and there's large amounts of time. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or any specifics, or if that ranges from state to state, location to location.
Well, I think the amount of time really does make a difference.
Yeah.
Because for me, if you're going to stay with your parents for a couple of weeks and it's within the United States, again, it's the secret part that I'm really opposed to. But if you asked me and you said, hey, I know we don't have a presence in Iowa, because I figure the only reason people would go to Iowa is to visit relatives. Don't come at me in the comments. Iowa's a fine place. But anyway, most bosses, I think, are going to be like, yeah, if you're a good employee. If you're a lousy employee, they're probably not going to agree with that. But if you're a good employee and you're like, I'm going to go to my mom's house for 2 weeks, I'm going to take my kids, they're going to have grandma, grandpa camp, I'm going to be working, my parents are taking care of my kids, whatever. I think most bosses are going to be totally okay with that. But if, on the other hand, and this was a comment that I got on one of my LinkedIn posts about this, was a woman said she's a regular cruiser. And she's like, I definitely don't work on my cruise, but she says, I always see people that are trying to do this hush travel, that they're on
That's
a
a rough
cruise.
one.
And for me, this is when I say, I don't think you're working. I don't think you're working full time when you're on a cruise. I don't. I don't believe that you are, unless you were dragged there by your spouse and you don't like cruising, which is possible. But I think that type of thing, I as a boss would be far more hesitant to be like, listen, that's what PTO is for. Take it.
Sure. I think that's interesting. Well, so there's some other considerations there, right? Cruising, notoriously very difficult Wi-Fi situation, right?
Right.
Very unreliable. So if you were, I could imagine a scenario where maybe you're a person who does these kind of regular trips and you're going for a specific purpose and you've got your reward points and whatever, maybe. But I do think the connectivity could be a pretty significant issue there. I have never personally been on any type of like cruise like that where I think you could reliably do that type of work. But it also depends on what type of work you do. If you do largely independent work where you don't need to be connected for the full time, it could still work. But I think that would work in only very limited cases.
And
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
it'd
I
be a
think this,
concern with the breach of, confidentiality, your connection, what you're going to have on a hotel, versus, in a cruise ship too. You're thinking about intellectual property of the company that is possibly becoming vulnerable because someone 2 cabins over is, trying to go through your account and scrape anything that they can and steal with it. That would be a scenario that I would be concerned with, along with possibility of someone having an issue and winding up on an episode of Locked Up Abroad. I brought that up to Suzanne earlier because
Listen, they could get locked up at home too. You never
I know.
know.
Oh, trust me, we deal with that. We deal
Sure.
with that.
Sure.
that's old hat
But
for HR people. Yep, build
I'm
in jail
sure.
again. Okay.
Oh no. But I did get that question about security, right? So obviously I've got people who are coming in from different industries, right? If you're in finance, it's a really big difference between, being in something that's more casual. And I could certainly understand if there's a pre-established set of security requirements that you would have to adhere to those at all times. What I think is kind of interesting is then I would not single this out as a problem scenario if that had not been addressed previously, right? Like, what about my home security connection? What are my VPN requirements? What are my authentication requirements? Those, if I was working in that type of industry, I would expect to be pretty familiar with what is and is not okay, the privacy screen, those types of things before this kind of, situation that would only come up for a little portion of the year it wouldn't be one of my top concerns.
I think, Robyn, you make an excellent point, is that it needs to be spelled out before. Like, this is the policy, this is why. And there's a comment here from Kim, I think, that deals with that. She says, I work in insurance litigation and I'm 100% remote. I can travel to another state or city to work as long as I let my leadership team know. It's generally not an issue. However, we did have an issue where someone needed to appear for a hearing and they could not because they were traveling and didn't let anyone know. Because of internet connectivity issues, they couldn't even log in for Zoom and someone else had to pick up their slack. And that, here is the policy, you can work from wherever, but you got to have connectivity. And
Yes.
and I'm someone that has worked from a variety of places. I'm a US citizen. I live in Switzerland. I own my own business here in Switzerland. And I've certainly given webinars from a variety of countries. And it's always a little bit of a panic. Is the Wi-Fi in Romania going to work well enough? And, one of the things that I do is that I don't count on hotel Wi-Fi. If I'm traveling to a place, I make sure that I have enough data on my phone that I can have a good connectivity. And if I don't have good connectivity from my hotel room, I will find it long before I need to do like a video conference. And that is definitely, I don't have a boss, so I do what I want. But it is something that you need to be very aware of. And as Kim's coworker didn't let anybody know that they were going and was doing it in a hush fashion. And instead of saying, an hour in advance, or maybe they did, hey, you know what, I just don't have the connectivity here. I think people will be more understanding than the shh. Oh, I can't do it. Sorry, I'm in Romania.
Yeah, you do have to expect a certain level of personal responsibility, right? So if like you're going to plan this and you're going to plan to work, a lot of Airbnbs and a lot of hotels, you can access and view what the security connection is going to be, or I'm sorry, the internet connection is going to be before you make that choice to book it. Don't make those assumptions.
Right.
And similarly, what are my hours going to be? What is my how will I be able to engage, and is it going to be at my regular work level? If so, mostly fine. And if not, then do I need special hours? Do we need to work through some kind of situation? And that also can kind of depend on, again, is this for leisure, or is this for caring for someone? Is it, for a special family event, those types of things. There's a lot there depending on the situation. If I was working with managers who were having those conversations, we would ask some of those questions.
It would have been
Absolutely.
interesting to find out how many people in a poll think that it's or feel that it's not the employer's place to know where they're working from.
Yes.
Are you an advocate for saying that, hey, look, no, don't ask, don't tell. Is that the type of avocation that you would provide to someone in the workforce, or would you say disclosure and having trying to have an open and honest conversation with your supervisor? Or are people too scared to do that? Or supervisors not trained well, or finding it difficult to work with people that have the flexibility and make those things happen? We can talk all day long about risk management and what we have to have. But when we can look at the barriers for removing dishonesty, we can have some more flexible working arrangements and actually find that the expense is not going to be that great from a risk management standpoint, or, technology standpoint, because technology is getting cheap. So what do you think, Robyn?
Yeah, well, it's such a good question, because you see other similar types of scenarios where, to your point, managers are not trained and they're not necessarily in the best situation to know how to handle this when they come across it. So I'll give you some examples. One thing that I saw people talking a lot about was, how managers can be invasive about health stuff, right? So obviously there's some different considerations there, but your doctors know well, are you really sick? Do you have a fever? This and that. There's some crossover, I think, in the types of concerns. Are you really too sick to come to work? Are you really not? Are you home in bed? That type of thing.
Right.
And I do feel that we've got this big disconnect between workers and people who are in management positions, where people who are in management positions largely favor the office environment. People who are in, regular workers, a lot of them are looking for more flexibility, especially now. So you see a lot of this push pull back and forth, and to leave the manager to handle that on their own, you've got to have a really well-trained leadership workforce who, understands the types of motivation and environment that they're trying to create for the employees. Otherwise, I think you're going to get a lot of invasive questions. Sometimes people may be in a situation where the reason is more delicate, or they're just not comfortable, or there simply just isn't enough trust built up between them and the employer that they are ready to share. So depending on the situation, I think, what other requirements need to be met, and can I meet them, and do I need to disclose, and for what reason do I need to disclose?
I think those are really important things. And I want to touch on one of the most important things you said there, which was that managers aren't equipped to handle this
Yeah.
kind of thing. And this is, I think these policies need to be made in advance. Um, and like you were saying earlier with don't come at me with data security when data security has never been an issue before. Right?
Yes.
When you haven't had a VPN and you haven't had this and you haven't had that, and then all of
Yeah.
a sudden they say, I want to go to my mom's house, and you're like, oh no.
Right. I can go to the coffee shop any day of the week, and that's fine, but I can't go to my mother's, which is one state over. Like, what's the reason?
And there's definitely that need for policies put together before this becomes an issue. And before we went on camera, we were talking about what we do, and I said I do a lot of compliance, and Robyn said, well, when I get to compliance, it's usually because something has gone wrong.
Yeah.
And so that's what me going, hey, everybody, let's do compliance first. Let's create our policy first. And then everybody knows what those boundaries are. And then there's no need for the secrecy that we all know, like Kim, that they can work in any state, but you can't go outside of the country. And we have people here saying, we had a new employee say they had power outage, and we checked their IP history and they were traveling to Mexico. Outside of the country is always far more sketchy. Now, from a technical legal standpoint, we're supposed to pay taxes in every state that we work in. And you only see this enforced with rock stars and sports people that are making $1 million just for playing one round of basketball, because the Kansas Revenue Service is not going to come after me or you for the 30 cents worth of taxes that we owe for being there for one night.
Sure.
But technically that is the case. But when you leave the country, one of the things someone mentioned, and I can't see because I've screened it, but it was about data. People don't actually know that when you cross the US border, you don't have any rights at that moment. They can take your computer and they can do whatever they want with it. They don't generally, but they can. And that's something that I really feel that the company needs to be able to say whether they're willing to take that risk or not. I did have someone say in my comments on LinkedIn that she worked in a government contracting role. And when she travels outside of the company, she's even required to take off her work email off of her personal phone, so that there is nothing.
I understand that.
There's nothing that if she gets pulled aside in customs, that she doesn't have
That would be at
anything
risk.
that would be at risk. And and to be honest, I traveled to 52 different countries. I've been through a lot of customs. Most countries don't care. If you come visit me here in Switzerland, they will stamp your passport, you show them your passport, and then for customs, there's literally two doors, one that says something to declare and one that says nothing to declare, and you choose a door. And once in a great while, I'll see somebody pulled over to the side, but it's always somebody with 400 suitcases. If you've got your one roller bag, you're golden, unless you have sweating bullets or something. But there are really strict rules in a variety of different countries, and technically you can't work here at all.
Sure.
Um, and 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 they can and will come out after you. And there's so many people that don't understand that. I get contacted all of the time by people that are like, I want to come to Switzerland. I'm going to come work there. And I'm like, no, you're not. And they're like, well, I own my own business. I can do what I want. Well, no, you can't. You can't. They're not going to let you. You can't live here. You
Yeah,
can't
and
work
I
here.
know that there's amounts of time, right? Like you can visit a country on regular, like, regular travel for a certain amount of time, but there's going to be a limit to that. And sometimes the limit is pretty small. You can visit. I got a question a lot, a really significant question, like over and
Right?
over again, which was, well, then what does that mean if I'm just doing my own traveling, I'm on my PTO, but I get an email that I'm supposed to respond to, or I'm still expected to check in once a day? Because I think a lot of people, I think especially now, I'd be interested to see some data on this and see whether or not it's true. People really seem to mostly stay connected. The fully disconnected PTO seems to be getting more and more rare because you're supposed to be accessible. So then people were really curious, why am I expected to respond when I'm on my personal vacation? But then there are these other concerns when I am, traveling, but I'm still working. How is that fair to me?
I think that's a really good question, but I think they're two very different things. One is we'd call de minimis. So like if you're just checking your email and you're spending 15 minutes responding to an email while on work, on vacation, that's a very de minimis kind of a thing. And it's very different than I'm going to my mother-in-law's and they don't speak any English and I don't speak any Dutch. So I'm just going to work for that whole time. That's a very different scenario than a 15-minute check-in every day. But I think the difference between the boss contacting you and you secretly being someplace else is the secrecy behind it. The boss is willing to take that risk of hey, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of work. But I will say my brother-in-law, my sister and my brother-in-law and their 4 kids, they're coming to France and Switzerland in a couple of weeks. Yay. But he's an executive in a large company. That's as far as I'm going to go. He's an executive in a large company, and he had to go through their legal department to get permission to bring his laptop, even though I happen to know that the company that he works for has offices in both France and Switzerland. So they're established in these countries, but their legal department still required him to get permission and authorization to take his laptop and to do some work here. But they are setting it out before, and he's not trying to sneak. And that is really where I think it comes down to it, is because there are risks. Technically, if Romania could have come down on me and said, hey, we authorized you to come into the country to speak at a convention, which I did, but we didn't authorize you to run the rest of your business, and we're going to charge you. That's a risk that I was willing to take. The risk is small. I own my own business. There is no other boss. It's me. It's all in my head. But if it was an employee, that's putting me, the business owner, at risk. I need the ability to say that's a risk I'm willing to take on. Because if, for instance, from a US standpoint, workers' comp claim, you're on the phone, business, you trip, you break your leg. Anybody that has ever broken a bone knows that your insurance will try everything in their power not to pay it, right? When my daughter broke her wrist, this was in the US, she was jumping off the coffee table. In our house, jumping off the coffee table, she broke her wrist. We got multiple things from the insurance company that we had to sign, swearing that it didn't happen anywhere else, that it was at our house. And they kept saying, are you sure? Wasn't it at the neighbors? It was at the neighbors. No, it wasn't at the neighbors. It was at our house. Because if it was at the neighbors, then it's covered by their homeowner's insurance. Where if it's at my house, it's covered by our health insurance. So of course the health insurance company doesn't want to pay for it. Same thing happens with workers' comp. So if you're a US employee, you have workers' comp, and it covers your employees for a variety of different situations. One thing that it doesn't cover your employees for is hush travel. And if you were out of the country and you trip and fall and break your leg while on a work call, and you try to submit it through your travel insurance or your health insurance, and they're going to be like, well, what were you doing? I was working. Oh, that's workers' comp. And they're not going to pay for it. And the workers' comp is going to say, you were out of our jurisdiction. We're not going to pay for it. And we had a person in the Evil HR Lady Facebook group that said she ended up, their company had to pay $1 million on a workers' comp claim for that very situation, because you're legally required to cover your employees anywhere they are working.
There's something interesting that you said, which is, you know, the employer or the manager is deciding whether to take the risk, you know, of contacting you and asking you a question or asking you to perform a task. I think a lot of people really don't like the idea that, okay, this risk exists. There's a risk on the employee side too, right? Maybe your claim's not going to get covered. And I think another thing that I saw often is, well, in a workers' comp situation, what type of work are we talking about here? Because I am a desk worker, right? And so what type of work would I be doing where I might be injured when I was in one of these types of situations? The risk, I think, does seem to be lower in general.
Absolutely. Absolutely lower in general for a desk type
And so
worker.
how high of a concern is that for me? How high of a concern is that for you? And I think it did come back around to people don't like the idea that they would be asked to work, but then they couldn't choose to travel and still, if they were able to meet their requirements, like this kind of back and forth. And I do think in some cases, a business, as you said, when they're establishing a policy, it may be the case that a rather basic policy is all that they need, right? Like you have to hit these minimum requirements, and you know, here are the boundaries. And as long as you're within those types of things, you know, work with your manager, go from there.
Well, absolutely. It would depend. General liability could possibly want to review policies beforehand. Sure. And I have seen time and time again for some policies that were loosely written too broad in regards to items that left them open for major risk, were shot down and said, we're not going to maintain your insurance with this current policy. These are some recommendations. And I ran into that last year with a purchasing agent, went hush traveled, went to the beach and was out by the pool. It was slick. He fell and he needed 18 stitches. And so it was from a scenario there. Plus he had an adult beverage, that was his hush travel. He was still working. He was capable of doing his job. There was a couple of things there going on that the company would have definitely had a difficult time with if they were aware of it. And his odds did not work out well for him. And so unfortunately, 18 stitches later and money out of his own pocket, that was the issue. Plus it created an issue for the company with their insurance carrier. They could be dropped, and their liability insurance is not cheap depending upon what industry they're in.
And that would be a regular health insurance claim, right? We're not talking about workers' comp in that situation.
No, we're talking about general liability too, because the company could be sued along those lines. So your standard policies and procedures have to be looked at from that aspect too, not just along the lines of, the actual safety or health of the employee, making sure that their injuries were taken care of if injured while on the job.
Sure. Well, they're not on the job though, right? In that case?
But he was.
Well, he was Mr. Purchasing Man by the pool with his laptop doing his little thing with his adult beverage. And this individual, his blood alcohol level was not above the legal limit. We were able to test him because he had an accident on the job. So
I see.
we did have him tested then, but it became such a problem because he wasn't where he was supposed to be. And
Yeah. Well, I
got
do see a
hurt.
comment over here that says this person's drinking on the job, which is, I think, a very good point. You got all the
Exactly.
concerns
So
there.
we already had issues there that we needed to
Yeah,
address.
sure.
It's clear. But the thing is from that standpoint of, are people feeling that there is, are they feeling so restricted in their job that they can't be honest with their superiors?
Well,
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. Katie Tanner says the whole secrecy travel is where the main issue is.
Yeah,
And I
the
agree.
dishonesty on the company side as well as the employee side. You know, I'm an advocate for organizations as well as employees. You know, I want return on investment for everybody, because if everybody's happy, we all make money, we go home happy. Well, we're not going to be able to meet everybody's needs along what they want. So how are we going to balance this? And the big thing is open communication. If somebody's going to zip their trap and not going to tell me that they're going to Myrtle Beach, you know, for shagging on the ocean and having some mixed drinks, you know, after hours, you know, because their job does afford them the opportunity to work from wherever, you know, that can be problematic.
sure. Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
There was another scenario that people asked about, that I think has a lot of crossover, which is you take your sales jobs and you take your management consultants, people who have the frequent travel.
Mhm.
And
Right.
again, super interesting because to your point, if you're frequently traveling either outside of your home office or outside of your home state, I even have a contact who, just right now is traveling not just, out of state, but also out of country. He's got several different sites to visit, and some of them are down in Mexico. And so people are curious about that. Like, why is I can go all of these different places that I'm expected to go, and it's not an issue. But then if I want to go to the lake house, it's an issue.
And it can be, and there's some good reasons for it. For instance, I was looking into this in preparation for this. Like, where can I go? Right? What's the visa requirements? And now, nobody make any business plans based on what I'm saying. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not advising you. This is Suzanne's 30 seconds of Googling.
Yeah.
Right? But it said that if I wanted to work in the UK, for instance, that if I was employed by a company that also has an office in the UK,
Mhm.
and I am traveling for the purpose of working in that office, then I
Yep.
don't need anything other than the tourist visa, which for US citizens, you don't need a visa, you can just go on. But if there is no office of my company there, and I go and I work there, then I'm violating the law. And if I'm honest at immigration, they won't let me in. So if I say, oh, I just want to work in a small English village and see if I get murdered, because that's what happens on all those television shows, they're going to be like, no, you can't do that. And they're not going to let you in. Now, the chances of them asking you that, slim. I've been to the UK a lot, and normally it's just, actually, now there are some times when you can just slide your passport through a scanner thingy and they take a picture of you and you're in. But that's what their rule is. If you're coming for a conference, you're also allowed. But if you're just going on your own, you're not. And so for business travel, oh, and for a client also. So it was specifically that you could go for the same company or to see a client. So when they're traveling for work, and this is one country, and there's, how many countries there are,
Sure.
174. But I imagine most of them are fairly similar, that's okay. That kind of business travel is okay. But it's that it's not authorized by the company, and you're not going for the purpose of meeting with someone there, or, carrying out work for your company that couldn't be done from there. So it's a different type of scenario. Now, with people that travel within the US, salespeople, truck drivers, or whatever, if you are doing that, if you're if your company covers all 50 states, then it's not a huge deal for you to work in any one of those 50 states because
Mhm.
your workers' comp covers it. They've got an established
Nexus there.
entity there.
Yep.
And like I said, nobody cares for your average employee that they're not going to pay their week's worth of Nebraska taxes. No,
Right.
no one cares. If you're Michael Jordan, we're going to care. But if you're Suzanne Lucas, literally nobody cares. I don't make enough money for anyone to care. But it's already set up for all of that. And then that's why there's not the issue with the business travel. And likewise, if your company is set up that way and you say to your manager, hey, I want to go to the cabin. I want to go to the cabin. I have Wi-Fi there. I'm going to sit on the porch. I'm going to look at the scenery and I'm going to do my sales reports.
Sure.
Unless you have a very mean manager, or if you're a poor performer, they're going to be like, sure, whatever.
Mm. Well, that comes back to the mean managers, right? Like, not necessarily, I wouldn't quite characterize it the same way, but a lot of managers are quite restrictive. I think this comes back around to the hush part, which
Yeah.
is that there are a lot of cases where the manager doesn't trust the team members and the team members don't trust the manager. And I think that's where you see the managers who are a lot more likely to ask invasive questions, be restrictive, be punitive, and also the employees who are a lot more likely to be secretive and protective because they are, I think in some cases, desperate for some flexibility.
I definitely think that problem builds on itself, right? That if I was a
Yes,
good
very much.
manager, then I have a good relationship with you. And if I say, hey, listen, Robyn, you can't work in Mexico. You can't. Sorry, we're not covered there. You can't do it. But I have a good relationship with you. And you're like, but you can, you can go work at your mother-in-law's house. That's fine. She's in Florida. Go put your feet up by the pool. Don't have too many adult beverages while you're working, or you end up with a workers' comp claim and Victoria will get mad at you. But otherwise, have fun. But we have that reasonable relationship. So maybe this is the key. I think you need the policy before the problem.
Sure.
And then it's about building those relationships with managers.
Yeah, and a lot of training and in some cases, I think the retraining of managers, because what is your role on the team? The thing that I do is I work with leaders to build strong, happy teams, right? Teams that perform really well. And that comes back around to hiring really great people. You have to build trust with them. And I think a lot of the time, the onus for that is on the manager. You have to recognize people have been through a lot. And so a lot of them either are taught not to trust their manager or have learned not to trust their manager. And so they're more protective. And if you as the manager are putting in the work to establish that relationship of trust, you're following something that's reasonable kind of on all sides. That's why I asked some of those questions, because I think a lot of people have this litmus test of, is this a reasonable request? If it's
Right.
reasonable because what I expect to get from you is similar to what you get from me, and we have this balance between us, I think you're a lot more likely to see people being forthright and open and not so paranoid, right? Which could
Right.
stave off a lot of bad situations. But if it's that high suspicion team, and a lot of teams are, a lot of people operate with a manager who's constantly looking over their shoulder, and it's not a pleasant feeling for a long, long time. And I think that people are increasingly frustrated with that because it doesn't seem necessary or fair. And so they don't want to give more information than they have to, and they don't want to do more than they have to.
True. And that's actually where HR needs to step in and
Sure.
and coaches. Robyn,
Yeah.
Suzanne, you're writing articles, you're writing books, you're speaking to the workforce, you're speaking to executives. I'm doing the same thing from the standpoint of letting people know that it's an employee-employer relationship. It's a business relationship that works both ways. And of course, unless you've got a union contract in play, you need to make sure that communication is going to be open and candid. If a union's in place, you're going to have that plus some.
Yeah, of course. That's going to be a whole other set of
And
restrictions and and,
And instead of sitting there and let's constantly pointing out all of our our problem, supervisors actually pointing out what is good effective communication between an employee and an employer, because sometimes it can go even too far, from the standpoint of having communication too open. You want to make sure that both people do understand what is considered to be good rapport and good open relationship.
Mhm.
You're not obligated 24/7, but you're representative of the organization. I don't care if you're making widgets. If you leave Widget World and you go to your local grocery store or Target, and you're shopping and you're wearing your little Widget World t-shirt, you're representing the company, whether you know it or not, and whether you've said anything, you walk through the door and you're representative of Widget World. And those are things that we fail to take into consideration. It is a partnership, it's a business partnership between employers and employees. And if supervisors don't get on board and understand that we can't get anywhere without these employees, they
Yep.
are not going to learn their job well enough. They will fall off to the wayside because the world of work is not tolerant of that type of supervision anymore. Would you not agree, Suzanne?
Absolutely. Definitely the world that I entered the workforce on is very different than the workforce today.
Mhm.
You were saying you want to say something, Robyn?
Well, I think that's so true. And what's interesting, I think that there's another sort of related situation. You've got your middle managers, your supervisors, your line managers. The other consideration, and I'm sure the three of us have each encountered this, is also your executive. Your executive with very strong beliefs about this, this, and this, right? So one reason that I initially took issue with the article is because I know certain executives who latch on to that type of message and will pry that home with them. And without a policy in place, without any specific rules, will say, no, this is another reason that I want to head this off at the pass because it's not something that I like. And so I am going to really, as firmly as possible, draw in on anything concrete that I can to attempt to get my way. And now, obviously, it's not all executives, but they are peppered in. You encounter them pretty frequently. These people who they feel what they feel, they want to do what they want to do, and they have a lot of influence within the organization. For me, that's one of the most dangerous things about this conversation is that if it is just used as a soundbite and not with the nuance of all the things that we've discussed and not with the actual work and effort that's involved, the steps to put in place, I really worry about how people will, take this off into their boardroom conversations and what they will do with it.
Exactly. Just as much as we're concerned with employees being given advice that they should not tell their employer where they're working at instead of at their home, or maybe they've at the laundromat and working, wherever they are in their hush travel world, just having someone out there saying, I wouldn't tell. It's not the employer's place to know where you're at. That's actually a major concern. So whenever we're representing the workforce and speaking for them, we need to understand what type of implications we could be putting ourselves in and them when you're saying, hey, look, you're not obligated to tell them where you are 24/7. You might be, it depends upon the company and what's going on. And actually
Yeah.
the culture that Mr. Executive or Mrs. Executive decides to have.
Yep.
It's up to them, and it is an employer relationship, and anyone can decide this isn't for me. I don't like this culture. He just doesn't get it. He doesn't get the way I like to work.
Yep.
And that's going to happen. It happens quite a lot.
I love
Absolutely.
your,
Okay.
oh, I was going to say, I love the laundromat example because that's so, it's so interesting, right? Because people who they go to get their
I've
oil
done it.
changed. They're doing a
Mhm,
load of laundry. Yeah, exactly. I
mhm.
think people have questions about that. And it comes back around to your point. Do I need to tell my boss if I'm getting my oil changed this morning, or I'm waiting at the car dealership for my car to get finished? Personally, I'm always really trying to actively build against that because I think it does not feed into the type of culture that I like to build at businesses. And I know I saw in the comments, people who work in healthcare, who work in finance, there's very strict and specific
Right.
items to consider. But I think it's interesting because there are a lot of those situations. And the other thing I don't like is like we wouldn't want to see that applied unevenly, right? Like the exec can go and get his oil changed, but
Absolutely.
I can't, right?
Absolutely.
And you do see a lot of that behavior, and it doesn't give people a good feeling.
And it
Yeah, and I
is
think it's very
unfortunate.
important to consider the type of job too. Like I said, if it's a
Yes.
healthcare finance thing, or if it's if it is where you're going to have to talk, and this is something I don't have a car, I ride public transportation, and which is amazing in Switzerland and not something most people in the US have to deal with. But I have been privy to a million and one business calls that I have overheard
Mm-hmm.
in a train. And most of them I could
It's true.
not care less. Like, you do you, honey. I have no issue. Just please be a little quieter. My ex-husband was on a tram, and there was a couple of men sitting in front of him having a business conversation. Turns out that they were consulting for the company that my husband worked for, and they were talking about how they were doing the same project for two different departments within the company and billing both of them. And
Wow.
so, which they didn't realize what a small city we're in, and also they don't realize that speaking in English does not protect you because everybody speaks English here. I mean, it's not the local language, but it's mandatory in the school, so everyone's going to understand you. So when you're having your loud English business conversation, everybody around you understands you. They got busted. Now, if that was good for the company but bad for the consultants. If they had kept confidentiality and had not been having this discussion on public transportation, they would have gotten away with it. I'm not advocating that kind of dishonesty. I'm just saying that if they had been typing emails, nobody would have noticed.
With their privacy screen,
With
right?
their
Could be
privacy
fine.
screen or whatever. But by having a conversation and doing a phone call, or if you're sitting in a Starbucks or a laundromat talking about Q3 whatever, you don't know who's in the table next to you listening. And that is something. And you might say, well, who's going to be listening to me about this when I'm in Mexico? Well, everybody goes to Mexico on vacation. How do
Well,
you
in
know
the
that
example, if you're admitting to wrongdoing loudly on a train of 50 people,
But it's not even admitting to wrongdoing. That was just something that was amusing. I have heard a lot of business deals going on, not necessarily wrongdoing. I don't care about them. They didn't affect my life, but if they did, then that's an issue. If they were talking about, their plans for something and I'm a competitor, yeah, that's an issue.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of an issue anyway.
Absolutely. Which is why, it's not irrational for a company to say, no, you can't work from a coffee shop. No, you can't work from a laundromat, depending on what you do. If all you do is sit and type on a screen, I'm going to be much more lenient. If you're a salesperson that is on calls all the time, if you are doing a meeting from a public place, which people do, it can not be good for the company. And that's why I'm just in favor of let's be honest.
Yeah, and there are industry by industry standards there. I think that,
Absolutely.
I've got a lot of experience with healthcare. And so, for example, there are very specific rules about, information being passed and what's okay, what's not okay. And people are really rigorously trained on that. And that would
Right.
apply whether you're speaking in a regular room full of people, you're at an evening barbecue, if you're in the middle of the workday, or you're on a sales call. That applies all the time. And it's nice and even, and people are familiar with it. Some of those things give me concern because if the issue is that you're going to reveal information that is unsavory, I think we got other problems.
Absolutely, that is, but it's just very amusing that it happened, that they thought that they were fine and they were
Yeah,
not.
I think a
They
lot
got
of people
busted.
would say, maybe they wouldn't mind that
I
that
don't feel so
person,
bad for them, but
yeah,
I
if they
thought their
wouldn't feel
boss
so
was,
bad for the person and maybe not for the company either.
yeah, I don't feel too bad for them, but there is something. Well, we are just about out of time, so let's wrap
So
up.
what are some solutions? I think that basically can we all agree that clear policy, communication, honesty is the place that the company, supervisors, and employees need to come from?
And I feel like if
Balance, I think something that's reasonably balanced for the employer and the employee that doesn't just favor one or the other. If you expect certain things of me, I expect certain things of you.
And that if your employees feel like they need to do hush travel, then there's either a
Yes.
a problem between the managers and the employee, or the employee is not the right fit. Because there are some people, and I saw it on the comments on your videos, and I saw it on the comments on my Facebook post and my LinkedIn post, that people were absolutely adamant that they didn't care what their employer said, they were going to continue to do it. That's not somebody that I want working for me, when they're just like, screw you, I don't care. And so I think that's a mismatch, and to which I would say, open your own business, take your risk on your own head. So I'm never going to say this is 100% a management problem, because there are terrible managers, there are terrible employees. Every terrible manager was once a terrible employee. So you can't have terrible managers and saintly employees. That both happen. But
I do think the employees are the responsibility of the managers, and it's the responsibility of the managers to have the right people on the team and to build relationships with them, communicate with them. Ultimately, if you have bad employees on the team, I always put that back on the manager. You can't have that person on the team if you can't trust them.
absolutely, absolutely. Let's get rid of that. You were getting an applause from somebody. With
Because
that,
people
let's end
don't,
on a high note with
it's a true
applause.
thing. You know,
Yay!
you can have a person who does something untrustworthy, they're unsavory. And ultimately, I don't care if you're the most brilliant program there that ever walked the earth, like you can't be on my team. You just can't.
Yeah, and let's this comment from T Beck. Since COVID, our company has been 100% remote, and almost all requests to travel domestically for short amounts of time have been approved. Trust and communication is key. We 100% trust all our team because they are still producing results, and I think that
That's very
is
good. You've done a very good job with the team.
very good. So everybody go work for T Beck's company. If they're hiring, let us know in the comments and we'll all apply. And Victoria just put in the SHRM code for credit in the comment, so we won't shut down pretty soon. But thank you guys so much for coming. Robyn, we really appreciate you coming. We threw this together on short notice. And we're delighted to meet you. Well, I'm delighted. I'm speaking for Victoria, but it's been delightful.
It's been
And
great. I'm so happy that you had me, and I'm great that everybody joined. Yeah, thank you all so much.
And Robyn, where are
Wonderful.
you? You're working from home, clearly.
I am. I do work from home. I'm in Philly. And if you're looking for me online, you can always find me on Instagram or TikTok, or send me a message and we can always chat.
All right. Thank you so much, Robyn. We really appreciate it. Victoria and I here at HR Learns, we hope everybody walked away with some things that they can implement. And the code, people are asking, it's scroll up, but we will send it out when we send out a copy of the video, but it is 24-TWNVM, and we're waiting on the HRCI code. They are slower, but I didn't say that out loud because I don't
They're
want to see
more
anything.
thorough. They're more thorough.
They're more thorough.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I'll see ya.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
When you stop recording.